Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM. Tonight, I've got an interesting interview with Erin O'Toole. Erin O'Toole is the Member of Parliament federally for Durham. He is a former Minister of Veteran Affairs, and he's currently running for leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Mr. O'Toole, thank you for joining us tonight.
It's great to be with you, Brian.
So maybe right off, why are you running, and why would you make a better Prime Minister than any of the other contestants?
Well, I'm running because I believe in this country. I'm a patriot, and that's the way I was raised. I grew up in the GTA in the suburbs of Toronto in Bowmanville, and raised to work hard, help others, and serve the country, and joined the military out of high school. And after I left the military, became a lawyer and worked in the private sector, I always wanted to give back to military families through the Legion, a Rotarian. I'm kind of a doer, and so when I was elected to Parliament, Stephen Harper then promoted me up the ranks. I was a cabinet minister. So I think I've got the right blend of skills that Canada needs at a critical time. And we don't need a celebrity prime minister. That's the current guy. We need someone who's going to get the country on track, take things seriously, and restore our reputation in the world. I've got more experience than any other candidates. I've got the right judgment, and I'm in the House ready to go. My main opponent is not in the House. And if we don't have an MP to debate the Liberals in September, when we have the most important debates in our country's history, we won't be a relevant choice for Canadians. So I think I'm the right choice for many reasons.
You said that you've got the more experience. I presume that means that your private sector experience, because I think your main opponent's got more government experience, does he not?
Yeah, he certainly does. He was elected in 1997. I've been in politics for 7 years. Before I ran for Parliament, as I said, I was in the military for 12. I was in the private sector for a decade, 5 years with 2 Bay Street law firms, working with large, small clients, working with resource issues. And then for 5 years, I was Procter & Gamble's lawyer in Canada and worked on issues ranging from competition law and marketing and advertising through to managing all their litigation, environmental issues. So a really good blend of skills. And then I was Stephen Harper's last cabinet minister. So I am the next generation of leadership for our party, but I have cabinet experience, and I was a safe set of hands, put it this way. I got things done, and that's what we need. I don't think we need sort of career politicians at this stage in our country's history. We're facing unprecedented challenges.
I interviewed Tony Clement, a former member of both provincial parliament as well as federal parliament last week. And he, I think, was a career politician, but he still, I think, is supporting you.
Yes, no, Tony's a terrific guy. And look, some people get into politics very young and distinguish themselves in the process. I respect that. I do think a unique part of what I'm offering, though, is I get it. I've served for Canada overseas on my naval ship alongside our NATO colleagues. I understand what it means to wear a uniform, and I'm wearing a pin for my squadron. The helicopter we just lost a couple of weeks ago was my old squadron, and so I can understand the stress and sadness that those families are facing. I've worked in the private sector with job creators, with risk takers. I've been at the cabinet table for discussions about military deployments, terrorism, drafting new laws, a budget process. So I think it's a really neat mixture of skills for someone who's only been in politics for 7 years.
Seems to me, as an outsider, that there were a lot of other potential leadership aspirants that got sort of scared off, and you didn't get scared off. Why are you different?
I'm in the trenches now. So what I think is key is I think a lot of people didn't necessarily get scared off. They enjoyed their public sector time. They also enjoy now their post-political careers and some of the engagement they're doing. And while people certainly like them and we're talking about them coming back to run, it takes a 150% commitment by you and your family. When I ran for office a few years ago, it wasn't to run for prime minister. It was to fill a by-election in my riding in the GTA. And my wife and I made the decision. Our children were younger, and we committed 150% to it. Now that commitment is easier because I'm in the House of Commons. I'm a member of the Conservative caucus now. Only 2 of the 4 candidates are current sitting MPs. But I think some people that were in politics in the past probably realized they weren't willing to do that 150% job again. It's hard to experience until you've done it. It is a 24/7 job.
How do you think you can beat Justin Trudeau?
Once again, I think through competence. I put out a program on response to the coronavirus at the end of February, early March, that would have saved lives, would have made the economic impact far less. The Trudeau government was far too close to China, the WHO. They followed bad advice. They weren't listening to even experts in our own country. They were changing their position midway through a pandemic on the use of masks, on how the virus was spreading. The country's uniting now because we want to get through this. And I've been working with the government, advising them, helping them on projects, but their response has been a travesty. And when we have enough distance from the crisis to talk about it, people will see that it was handled incompetently. And now we're facing, Brian, a $250 billion deficit. Trudeau was running deficits in good economic times. Is he going to be the one to get our private sector going? Is he going to be the one to restore financial stability to the country? No, I think people will be looking for experienced leadership, principled leadership. And I think, as I said, the Prime Minister's own response to this crisis was inadequate on all levels.
We're chatting with Erin O'Toole, a candidate for leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, wants to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We're going to come back with more with Mr. O'Toole in just a second. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Erin O'Toole. He is the Member of Parliament from Durham. He's been in politics, I think he said, for 7 years. He's before that worked on Bay Street with law firms, with Procter & Gamble as a lawyer, and before that served in the Canadian military overseas. So he's got some interesting different career history than other people have. And I'm one person who's always said that people should have some private sector experience before they run for politics, particularly for Prime Minister. And so that's encouraging. Mr. O'Toole, you've been very vocal about the Chinese involvement in COVID-19 and suggesting that they should be criticized far more than they have been. Tell me a little bit about your position on China and COVID-19, if you could.
I'd be happy to. So 2 years ago in the House of Commons, I asked Justin Trudeau to stand up against China's manipulation of the World Health Organization's pandemic planning. 2 years ago, they were excluding Taiwan, and Taiwan was a country that Canada actually worked with in the aftermath and during the SARS crisis about 17 or 18 years ago. Tony Clement, your previous guest, was the health minister in Ontario during that crisis. Tony and I have talked about it. China was using its political influence to politicize UN agencies that were meant to be planning for pandemics. I asked them about that 2 years ago. They did nothing. They were currying favor with the regime in Beijing, and it was leading to bad results despite Trudeau's admiration, as he said, for the basic dictatorship. So we knew that there were risks with the Chinese state manipulating global bodies so that we could then no longer trust all of the information coming from that body. Did I know when I asked that question 2 years ago we'd be in the middle of a pandemic? No. But I did know, and many observers knew, that China was disrupting the WHO, the ICAO, the World Trade Organization. We saw the US president bring tariffs to stop the transshipment and dumping of Chinese steel and aluminum. So the Communist Party of China has been disrupting the rules-based global order on many ways, and we've been largely silent for two reasons. Mr. Trudeau's been pursuing a free trade agreement with China, and he's also been pursuing a Security Council seat at the UN. And I think his pursuit of these objectives has put Canada at a disadvantage when it comes to trade, when it comes to international relations. And COVID was an example of this. There was a slow response, I would say a less than transparent response from the start, and that's what's made the global pandemic worse.
Now, you say that our response is a travesty. I think that the numbers that I've seen show that we have a per capita incidence of infection that's half the rate of the United States, which would suggest that things have been done okay here. Why do you think it's been a travesty?
Well, our better point of comparison would be a country like Australia. Similar to our size, similar political, legal, all these sort of structures. We are faring worse than them. I think the American response has been confused and insufficient from day one as well. So, you know, that point of comparison is what the Trudeau government is hoping Canadians will look at. When I called for a stop from flights from hot countries at the end of February, early March, that would have prevented hundreds, if not thousands, of cases from coming into Canada. Once that happened, community spread was inevitable. Remember, until mid-March, the Liberal government's position was that travel restrictions were not necessary and that there was no requirement for screening or quarantining people coming at the border either. They were a month and a half out of step with a lot of other countries in terms of response, in terms of the border and controlling flights. That made the challenge worse. We were going to suffer from the pandemic, no question. It's the slow response on the health side that saw us get into the situation where we're now seeing spread in areas of vulnerable groups and others. Provinces that restricted movement as much as possible, like New Brunswick and some others, have fared better within the Federation because they've taken these concerns seriously.
If you were Prime Minister at the time, would you have put up a border wall between Canada and the United States earlier?
I would have, yes. With not a border wall, you would have restrict access on the border. That's easy to do. I would have also required medical screening as of March 2nd for anyone coming to Canada from a hotspot country. We were seeing right up until our country went into shutdown, agents at Pearson just giving people a one-page read this form if you'd like. There was no medical screening at all. That allowed us to let a lot more cases in. That was actually directly contrary to some of the learnings from SARS. So this virus was more challenging, Ryan. We know that because people could be asymptomatic and spread it without the temperature or some of the telltale signs they had with the SARS virus. That made it more of a challenge, but also a reason to be more vigilant. As I said, Minister Haidju, I hold the Prime Minister and the Minister responsible because in mid-March, they were still trying to discount the fact that COVID-19 was a risk to Canada when other countries were starting to go into full lockdown. They were living in a bit of a dream world, and I think we responded slowly as a result.
It seems in watching, Canadian media versus American media that the American media and the American political spectrum is far more antagonistic and critical and looking for ways to be partisan between the two parties. And other than some comments that you've made and Andrew Scheer has made and others, there doesn't seem to be that disagreement in Canada. There seems to be a lot more sort of Team Canada attitude. Why the difference? Because given your comments, it sounds like you've got just as much criticism of the government here as the Democrats have of the government in the United States.
Well, I think there's a few reasons for that. We want to make sure that the response works. And so we were focused on getting our citizens back. We were focused on getting personal protective equipment, for the hospitals in my region in Durham. I was working with various ministers on trying to repatriate mask production from China, for example. So it was an all hands on deck. But what I don't like sometimes with the Liberals is they'll say it's Team Canada. That means you can't criticize. No, I want Team Canada to succeed. So if you're falling short, my job is to make sure you don't fall short. So when the Prime Minister announced the initial aid package, Ryan, it was $27 billion. I said that was a joke. In fact, the wage subsidy announced, it was a 10% wage subsidy. I worked on restructuring of companies as a lawyer. 10%, no one was going to maintain a job and put it into sort of hibernation for 10%. We said the day Trudeau announced his package that they would have to triple the amount being spent. They would have to bring the wage subsidy up to 75%. They had to bring a second emergency bill to Parliament because they didn't listen to us the first time. We passed the emergency bill. We had to come back weeks later to pass the other bill because they didn't get it right. So should we not have been critical? Yes, we have to be critical, but we don't stop progress from being made. We try and be tough and strong and clear, but we want people to be safe. We want people to be healthy. I'm disappointed the economic response was pushed at getting more people on the CERB than saving more jobs. That's unfortunate. It's going to mean our recovery is harder. But at the end of the day, we want Canadians to succeed. So there's a little different tone here, but I'm just as concerned as some politicians in the US would be about the response.
Should we be reopening the economy around Victoria Day?
Yes. Yes. I've been talking about this for over a month now. Reopening does not mean going back to normal. Reopening means learning the distancing practices that the essential services have made. I joke, I'm the Costco and grocery store warrior in my family. I wear a mask during that. I see how many of the businesses have adapted their processes. So we need to take that same distancing adaptation to other retail settings. I've been an advocate and was pushing for mask use before the chief medical officer and the Trudeau government started advocating mask use, because any of the services like barbers, salons, any of that direct interaction with a client or a customer will require enhanced sanitation, enhanced mask use. So we have to learn. We can't be paralyzed forever, but we have to learn how to mitigate as much as possible the risks through spacing, through mask use, through sanitation, through staggering employees in a workplace, maybe having some of them telecommute or telework for some days of the week. We should have been asking businesses to start planning for a reopening earlier, so when the reopening happens, it's ready. And that's part of the reason the PPE, the mask requirement for Canada, is not just the N95 for the hospitals. We will need to incorporate mask use in many industries over the next year.
You said you worked on Bay Street as a corporate lawyer. Do you think that we're going to have a hollowing out of downtown Toronto?
There's been, that was something that was said back when the internet and the ability to work remotely was being rolled out. I think Procter & Gamble, when I was working for them, they went to a hoteling type approach for offices where you didn't have an office and you could work some days from home. I think it'll see more flexibility. I do think it'll probably put a little bit of a softening on demand for prime commercial space in downtown, but I don't think it will do a hollowing out like some people feel. Business, like any other part of human interaction, requires a degree of personal connection. And if it needs to be put on hold a bit or changed a bit because of health reasons, let's do that. But I do think we all want to get back to a normal, and it may take a little while, but I don't think you're going to see empty towers.
The numbers in the United States just recently this week have doubled in the models for how many people are expected to die by August 4th, just because of the reopening. Are we rushing the reopening in North America?
I don't think so. Look, I don't profess to know what each of the states are doing on a localized basis. I certainly know there's been a lot of criticism of some of the plans in the US. I'm only focused on here. I think the Ford government in my own province has been doing a very good job. I think the Moe and the Higgs governments in New Brunswick or Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, respectively, put out a very thoughtful set of staged reopening. That's exactly what we need to do. Don't be scared of the new normal. Prepare for it. And that's why I was saying long ago, we needed to get people used to wearing masks. I still feel a little weird when I'm popping into Shoppers to get a prescription for my son, and I'm putting my Special Forces inspired O2 mask that I've been working with that company. I feel a little weird, but this is about setting an example as a public figure that where I can minimize in more confined spaces, that's appropriate to do. Some businesses, as I said, my barber is desperate to get me back. I don't know why, because I don't give him much to work with. But I've told him, you better be working on your masks and your gloves and all these provisions, because any of those service businesses that are close, including restaurants, we will have to adapt for a while, but that doesn't mean never opening. When I heard the Prime Minister in one of his daily press conferences at one point suggest we couldn't really reopen until there was a vaccine, that's ludicrous. We can't be like this for 18 months. So let's be smart. Let's learn from the businesses like banks and others that have been working through this time, and make our measures even smarter by sector. So I know the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the CFIB, a number of groups have been working on this, and I trust that process.
What happens if we get a second wave? 1918 Spanish flu, the second wave was more lethal than the first wave.
We will get a second wave. We will. So let's not mince words about it. We have to be ready for it the second time. We were not ready for the first wave. As I said, I lost a lot of confidence in the Trudeau government in their response to the first wave. A lot of other countries, we're engaging in some strategic closures, mask use, a whole range of things, travel restrictions far earlier. We've now learned. We now know this time the acute needs will be vulnerable peoples, seniors' homes, those isolated student dormitories. So I'm sure that universities, I know my own university in Durham, they're looking at it, that colleges and others are looking at some distance for the first few months. But we have to be ready for the second wave so that we can protect the vulnerable and jump on and track an outbreak if possible.
It's shocking what's been happening in seniors' homes. Have we got a real problem with seniors' homes?
No, we have a real problem with the fact that we did not have enough PPE. We did not have enough training for the most vulnerable. And this is where the military guy in me thinks we have to have many after-action reports to learn from some of the areas where we had the biggest problem in the first wave. What we didn't realize is these confined areas where the most vulnerable, seniors, many with existing health conditions, we should have ramped up there much faster than we did in terms of precautions, protections. The ones that did and didn't get an early case in have been okay. Some that got early cases in became very, very tragic situations. And I know everyone's got a family connection with someone in their family in one of these long-term or seniors residences, including ours. And it's been a point of concern. So this is where our most acute resources and planning have to go for a potential second wave, or a second wave we know will come. How do we focus our resources on the most vulnerable? And the seniors residents will be ground zero for that. So better PPE, training, better support for the personal support workers and some of the great frontline work there. And practice, changing practices about visiting, about socializing, and sanitation. So I think we can blunt the second wave in a major, major way. But until we have a vaccine, we will have to be vigilant in all of these precautionary measures.
We're chatting tonight with Erin O'Toole, a candidate for leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, and wants to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. We're going to take a quick break and come back and ask him a few quick non-COVID-19 questions. Stay with us. Well, we're having a fascinating interview tonight with Erin O'Toole, the MP from Durham, a former Minister of Veteran Affairs, someone who's got a fair amount of private sector experience, both in the military as well as a lawyer, and is now running to be our next Prime Minister, or at least a leader of the Conservative Party and wanting to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. We spent the last couple of minutes talking about COVID-19, and Mr. O'Toole, I'd like to ask you now a couple of sort of non-COVID questions, if I could. I had a bunch of sessions during the last federal election with a lot of different people about the election, and it sort of came down to, I think many of the people I interviewed were of the opinion that Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party didn't appeal to the suburbs of Toronto, and you got elected in the suburbs of Toronto. I'm in Mississauga. You only won one seat in the whole west side of Peel and Halton. You lost You lost, Halton to an Olympic rower. You didn't win anything in Oakville and Burlington. You only won one seat in Caledon. What are you going to do different that's going to allow the Conservative Party to appeal to suburban GTA?
Well, a few things, but right off the top, I am a 905 MP. So as you said, we didn't win in some of the ridings that we should have. And having a leader from the region, I would not only be the first Conservative leader since 1948 from Ontario, I would be the first Prime Minister from the GTA ever. And so I think if those families, particularly suburban families in Mississauga, in Durham, in Halton, Peel, if they want to see their interests reflected, a strong economy, safe communities, support for small business, an effective and fair society where everyone has the chance to succeed, a principled Canada on the world stage, I can reflect that for them. I can tackle the real issues. I'm not about sort of virtue signaling as Justin Trudeau does with tweets and wearing socks. I'm about them. I'm about serving their needs. I want to make sure their kids have the same opportunity that I had growing up in a middle-class home in Bowmanville, Ontario. I think my story can resonate with a lot of families a lot more than the oldest son of the Prime Minister born on Christmas Day in 24 Sussex. I think there was an early fascination with Mr. Trudeau, and I do think most people know he can't relate to the challenges a small business owner in Mississauga is facing, for example, because they were left entirely out of the emergency business account, the rent relief. A lot of the programs that the Trudeau government rolled out missed owner-operator businesses and things in the GTA. But the other thing, apart from just my personal story and my ability to connect in my part of the country, we need to have policies that appeal to the issues 905 and 416 voters want to hear from us on. We made a mistake not having strong, principled, conservative environmental policies out early. We allowed our opponents to describe us as climate change deniers or we had no plan. We allowed them to do that because we released our plan so darn late, and then Andrew never spoke about it. Most people thought, yeah, we didn't have a plan. I want to get one out early, show them that we take the environment seriously, but our approach is going to be to step down emissions and not just to raise taxes. I think Indigenous reconciliation, immigration, any issue that voters in the GTA want to talk about, we have to show here are our conservative ideas, here's how we're listening, here's how we're building trust back with these voters, and then show them, look, we're strong on the economy, we're in a bit of a fiscal mess. As long as you're comfortable on these other issues, vote for us because we'll get our economy moving again.
It seemed to me that the Conservative Party really didn't address a lot of fiscal conservative kind of typical issues in the last election and allowed Maxime Bernier to be one of the only people that talked about that. What would your strategy be from a fiscal standpoint?
Well, the biggest thing will be getting Canada back on a plan and a fiscal footing that preserves our future. And I'm not exaggerating. With $250 billion deficit, we will face risks for our healthcare system, for even programs like OAS in the future, if we don't get our fiscal house in order. It's so large of a challenge that it will likely be a plan that's almost a 10-year plan. But I think we have to show that we'll have a disciplined, strategic plan to do that. But the most important thing, Brian, is our economy, our recovery needs to be driven by the private sector. Just before COVID, Warren Buffett pulled his investment out of Canada because of illegal rail blockades and political risk. We saw Tech Resources cancel a program that would have invested $70 billion in Canada's economy over 30 to 40 years because the Liberal cabinet is against resource development. We had bad trade deals with NAFTA that hurt our auto parts industry in Ontario, hurt aluminum producers in BC and Quebec, all because of poor policies from Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. I'm going to stand up for all of those jobs. I don't think the Liberals do. I don't think the NDP does. I don't think Jerry Dias and Unifor do. We will stand up for working people, people that want to get this country moving again. We need a private sector-led recovery, and we need to be proud of every sector of our economy.
Do you believe in climate change? Is it man-made?
Man is a major contributor to global warming, absolutely. And it's a matter of how do we address uh, global warming, and how do we address the potential economic shock to change. Some of the ridiculous voices out there, and I call them ridiculous because they have no plan, would like to shut down our economy in return for commitments we've made in Paris. I think we can step down large emissions. I think we can make our transportation system more efficient. I think we can export clean Canadian LNG and uranium and nuclear power from Ontario, that technology, can-do technology, best in the world, to reduce emissions globally from coal being used for generating electricity. In fact, the Paris Accord, Brian, 1/3 of the entire Paris Agreement stems from coal burning for generating power. And I'll tell you, China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and all of these countries building coal plants, they're suddenly not going to say they don't need to keep the lights on. What we need to do is also enhance our global effort, do our part at home, but make sure we're part of the larger shift away from coal in those countries. And I think nuclear power, which Catherine McKenna and Justin Trudeau do not support, she didn't mention nuclear following the Paris Accord. These are signs of ideology. Ideology is not going to lower emissions. A plan is.
If you were Prime Minister during the blockades of our railway lines, what would you have done?
I rolled out a plan, and the plan was so engaging. That was one of the reasons Jason Kenney endorsed me for leader. We needed to declare critical public infrastructure as being immune from unlawful protests, to shut them down for the economic aspects of those critical pieces of public infrastructure, rail lines, bridges, pipelines. This is where protest is an important freedom of speech quality, but that doesn't allow you to disrupt the economic potential of the country by shutting down the eastern rail lines of Canada because of a pipeline dispute in BC, for example. So that would have criminalized at the criminal code level disruption of critical pieces of public infrastructure. It would have allowed police to move on it immediately because it's not like a mischief or trespassing situation. It would be a criminal code violation. I also want to start exposing groups that are receiving foreign funds. I don't think anyone that receives foreign funds and engages in illegal activity should be a CRA tax-assisted charity. We have to recognize that these disruptive elements of foreign funding have been in Canada for well over 10 years, and it's time to root them out.
Would you walk in the Pride Parade?
I've been to many Pride events in my riding already. My voting record since I was elected, I have voted for human rights. I always will. And voted, I was just one of 18 MPs that voted for a pro-LGBT bill when I was only in the House 4 months. So my record is clear. I won't go in Toronto because they exclude military members, veterans like myself, police officers. Some of the parades that have become very politicized, banning groups or having floats that are anti-Israel, I won't go in politically motivated parades, but I'd be happy to participate in one that's about equality, about diversity, about respect. I've always stood up for rights. That's what the uniform I wore serving our country represented. All rights. You don't get to choose which ones you defend.
Was legalization of cannabis a good strategy?
No, it was not. I had advocated for decriminalization. In fact, I criticized my own party in the 2015 election because I was an advocate internally and externally for decriminalization. That would have still allowed the marijuana to be illegal, but it would have caused a ticket offense for someone. No one wanted anyone to pay a penalty. That would have allowed us to go from a regime where it was illegal to a regime where it was more monitored and there was no criminal sanction. I think Trudeau moved too quickly. He skipped an important step. I think he didn't listen to law enforcement, didn't listen to healthcare, and there has been a bit of a mess on the file. I wouldn't dial it back now, but that's where my position was when he legalized it.
What's your position on gun control?
Well, we need real gun control, meaning we should stop illegal smuggling of guns across the border. That has gone up in the time that we've seen 60,000 people walk across the border in places like Roxham Road, Quebec. We've seen increased smuggling of illegal guns from the United States. The latest moves the Trudeau government did, nothing shows how Bill Blair and Justin Trudeau lie to Canadians, and I don't use that word accidentally, when they have to use a word like military rifle or an assault-like rifle. None of that is true. I was in the military. I have fired automatic military rifles. We don't have anything of the sort in Canada. We have semi-automatic rifles. Some of them may be black in color, but they're trying to scare people that don't understand the system of screening, training, and licensing we have in Canada. So I would like to make sure the public is part of understanding our regulatory system. We have to go after the real issue, which is illegal weapons, supporting criminal guns and gangs networks. That's what Bill Blair used to do when he was a police chief. Now he's a Liberal politician, so he goes after law-abiding owners and ignores the criminals.
What's your vision for Canada in like 5 or 10 years? Do you have one?
Yes, we need to be a leader of the realignment of the democratic world to make sure that we have fair and effective rules-based trade that respects human rights, that respects the environment, and that reforms agencies like the United Nations and others that have been increasingly gamed by the bad actors, whether they're China at the WHO, whether it's Syria, chaired the Conference on Disarmament a few years ago. A country that used chemical weapons on its own people was chairing the committee to stop the proliferation of chemical weapons. So you can't look at these agencies and say the global rules-based system is working. The bad players are gaming it, and the good players have been silent. So I think Canada needs to be a leader. We're a G7 country, a NATO country, a Five Eyes. We're the only integrated security partner for the US. So instead of T-shirts and slogans vis-a-vis the US president, Canada should be using influence in a way that helps our country and helps the world, and perhaps would be a good influence on the US as opposed to always showing how we're not the US. We need to use our relationships to rebalance trade, bring some jobs back to Canada, make the world a safer place, and make sure we're ready for a global pandemic next time, because we clearly weren't this one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erin O'Toole, candidate for the Conservative leadership federally. Do you have a final message for Canadians in our tough time right now?
It is a tough time. I want to wish all families the best of health and strength, and know that all politicians care for their well-being. It's not a blue versus red or orange thing. It's about what are we going to do come September when we're through the worst of the first wave? How are we going to get Canada back on track fiscally? How are we going to make sure people have the ability to work and that small businesses can bounce back? I truly think this is where we don't need more celebrity image-based politics. We need a roll-up-the-sleeves plan, a real leader, someone who's done some of this in the real world before politics. I'm asking for their support, erinO'Toole.ca. It would be great to have a suburban Toronto MP become Prime Minister of Canada. I think it's time, and I think that's as important for Mississauggans as it is to folks in Durham.
Well, Mr. Erin O'Toole, MP for Durham and candidate for the Conservative leadership, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure meeting you and a pleasure chatting with you and asking you about some of your issues, and I appreciate your comments on COVID-19 and your vision for Canada. Anytime during this leadership campaign and or when you succeed after that, feel free to give me a call if you want to come back on, talk to people in the Mississauga area. It's been a pleasure meeting you, sir.
I appreciate it, Brian. I've enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Well, that's Erin O'Toole, MP Durham, candidate for the Conservative leadership on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Good night. Well, that was a fascinating conversation that we had tonight with Erin O'Toole, the Member of Parliament for Durham, former Minister of Veteran Affairs, and an interesting gentleman because he's got a career that is not a professional politician, a career politician career. He mentioned that he'd been in the Canadian military, that he'd been a corporate lawyer on Bay Street, that he had been a lawyer with Procter & Gamble. And so he is going to bring a different kind of knowledge base to the job. And I am one that has often criticized politicians that are just career politicians that have never done anything but politics in their life. There are some good ones. And we talked about Tony Clement. He's a friend of mine, someone that I've supported in the past, even though I tend to be more liberal. But someone that was, I think, a career politician. I think having people in politics that have got real private sector experience, whether it's as a lawyer or whether it's as a business person or whether it's as an academic or as an entrepreneur, I don't care. But I think some real world experience gives them a better appreciation for what you and I go through on a daily basis, and how you meet payroll, and how you create businesses, and how you open businesses, and what the challenges are of living a life when, you know, the politician's life is a little bit different. There's not job security all the time because you got to run for re-election, but once you got elected, there is job security, and I think that is a lot different than a lot of us live on a day in and day out basis. I thought he was quite frank with answers to a bunch of the questions I had asked, and I appreciated that. And I think that, you know, a lot of people didn't think this was going to be a race. And it's interesting how many people, at least to me, have called me up of late and told me that I should check out Mr. O'Toole and see what he has to say, because he's got a chance, a real chance of winning, and if not winning, influencing this race dramatically. And I think he's right. It would be great to have a prime minister from the GTA, personally, because I do think that Toronto, or the greater Toronto area, the greater Golden Horseshoe, has been and is an economic engine for Canada, and we have been underrepresented in the PMO or in the Prime Minister's chair, and I'm not sure why. I think it's somewhat because people don't like Toronto, the rest of Canada, too often, and don't realize that we've got some pretty capable people here, and we should have that opportunity to be in the Prime Minister's office just as much as someone from Calgary or Saskatchewan or Montreal. Anyway, great to chat with Erin O'Toole, candidate for the Conservative leadership, and obviously, if he wins that, then candidate to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. Great chatting with him, and I'm going to try to get other people from the candidacy from that leadership race on. So stay with us. We're on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on Saga 960. You can stream us online at www.saga960am.ca, or you can get all my podcasts and webcasts on briancrombie.com. Good night.